Hi, this is Jeff Arnette. It's I was born in 1948, right there in Alexandria, Virginia. It was a friendly new neighborhood with townhouses and individual homes that are warm and friendly. No one really locked their doors. They basically trusted their neighbors and they shared looking out for each other. It was a lot of fun running into the woods, playing with the animals. It's still like that. We were big bicycle riders. Schwinn bikes were the ones that were the most popular. But the thing I enjoyed the most was actually roller skating. We had Union 5 roller skates, and you could separate those into two pieces, and we nailed them to a 2x4 and had our first skateboards. Now, I like to go down into the woods. We would turn over rocks and collect frogs and all sorts of critters that we could find. And it was neat because they would eventually escape. But by and large, it was fun being down in the woods. What was interesting about the woods is that they weren't there all the time. You could go down in through the woods and the woods would start disappearing as people built new houses down in the woods, and taking away the fun aspect of being in the woods. And so we decided that we'd explore the new neighborhoods going in, and that became more and more fun because there's new families would move in, and the new families were interesting people, and we got to know them. And so neighbors became neighbors. Our neighbors were like another set of parents. Those mothers and fathers of other children, they looked out for everybody's kids. So they kept an eye on our house when we weren't there. And we would keep an eye out from their house when we were there and they weren't. That trust became important because as time went on, that became less and less prevalent. And we didn't have that kind of trust forever. By the time I got into high school, it was pretty much gone. You didn't leave the house without locking the door. And you kept an eye on everybody else's automobiles, other people's bikes. Just need that trust factor. It got more difficult to consume and help out. So trust your neighbors. Look out for them. It's the right thing to do. Is somewhat inventive by converting, as you guess, a bicycle and changing the bicycle into a motorcycle. Now, I wasn't the guy who was the genius on this. It was the father of a friend of mine. And what he did was he helped me take a standard Briggs and Stratton 1.5 horsepower engine and mount that on the bicycle. And within a couple of days, we were motivating down the road on this bicycle that had a lawnmower engine on it. And I had tried to stay on top of things. So even when that quit working, we still rode our bicycles. And we rode them down to the Potomac River. And that's about 11 miles. But, you know, if you ride the downhill parts, you can pick up speed. And it was wonderful. Being free and having the freedom of taking that house key and then disappearing for the day. That was what I enjoyed the most. The freedom of being able to go away, some new place I've never been before, get on that bicycle and disappear for the day. Family was the most important thing. Not just my family, is the other families. Because one of the jobs I had was delivering the Washington Post. And I got to know the names of many of the people in my neighborhoods because they took the Washington Post and I was the one that had to deliver it. Rain, shine, snow, ice, doesn't matter. You had to get it, the delivery done. And it was fun getting to know the people. Some were more friendly than others. But the bottom line is I was their delivery boy. And I enjoyed the job. High school was wonderful because of the theater that was in there. I ran track for a year or so, but I wasn't very fast. But somehow I got recognition as being a, a I think they called it thespian. That was it. And as a thespian, we got to pretend like we were other people. And it got to be fun. And we were good at it. And part of that is the enjoyment we had for the thespian part of us took over after school. And we were in a thespian group that operated outside of school. It was our opportunity to pretend as we are outside acting. That was the, wait a minute, it's coming. Boxwood Theater Company. And we became real thespians. And it was really enjoyable. And we would do 2 or 3 productions during every summer. And the interesting thing was the teacher in the school, which was Groveton, she delivered on her promises. And we ended up in that theater, Boxwood Theater Company. And we were now being paid to show up, and that money just went right back into the theater company. And one of the players that was in production there was Gary Beach. The important thing to know about Gary Beach was that he ended up on Broadway, and not just in one production. He ended up in several productions because Groveton High School had a great football team. They had a pretty good basketball team. It was a great place to grow up. We enjoyed it. It's always a challenge when you hear what your buddies are doing. They were getting involved with this thing called Cub Scouts, and I wanted to be a part of that too because they were going to have some fun. So and yet at the same time help some people. What we're trying to do at this point is find out what are they doing and why. And the next thing I know, it was fun because we had these groups of young men who were out ready to shovel the snow and work with the elderly who needed help. And some of the issues that came up for them were, in fact, shoveling snow because they had a hard time with it. And being part of that led into a more serious approach of Boy Scouts. And that's where we learned to stand up on our own feet, help other people, and learn how to camp. And that's what made me think of Boy Scouts, is that you could get these badges and emblems and sew them onto uh, a representation of what you were able to accomplish. And so we did. And it was a lot of fun for the kids, especially when we went camping. And then we went down to Prince William Forest off of I-95 South. And it was at that camp out that we learned how to cook hot dogs, chase frogs, sew up and tie up knots. And so we began our vision into adulthood, that we could camp out and put the tents together and you get some food to eat, and be part of the team that put everything together. And I was thinking, somewhere down the road, I'll be part of a group helping to tell somebody their stories. Because that's what we were doing, trying to tell our stories through the accomplishments, and badges, and the stories that we would write up about our team's effort. And so it began. But it wasn't until later in life that I started working for a company that enabled me to be on a team and have that team deliver the goods to whoever the boss was. So we were always looking for what's next. And that enabled me to put together a program, take care of, be responsible and take care of a piece of equipment, learn how to do the photography end of what we were doing. And then photography became a printing press. And we were printing out the information that people were paying for. And that was the start of a actual job that we would get paid and eventually get into a session where we could make sure that we were delivering on the goods, delivering the information that they were requesting that led to the Watergate story and several other groups of people. And we wanted to continue to be part of it. And that, so there I was every Friday evening. We would have all the information gathered for this week's weekly report. And the weekly report shared all that information as to what was going on the Hill, what the votes were. And so it began a career in sharing information. And it was quite a story to be going in those days, working for information that would help major newspapers, news and magazines with what was going on the national level, where those votes were coming from. And so it began. I decided that for some reason or other, it might be a good thing to do would be to run away and earn a living. Wasn't sure how that was going to go. But it was like around the junior, senior year of high school that for some reason or other, I decided it was a good idea to disappear, find a job, go live somewhere. And of course, that was on a Friday afternoon where I had all of about $18 in my pocket and no real change of clothes and no real idea about where I was going to live, except that two IT guys from Pennsylvania I had met during the previous summer, and they invited me to spend the weekend with them to see if this is a smart idea or not. And needless to say, uh, two visits to a couple of bars and hanging out and going bowling with these guys, and my independent career was launched. But it was pretty straightforward and became quite apparent that after 2 days, on the third day was the chance to make a real decision. And these guys wanted to go bowling. It turns out the bowling alleys that they were going to was no worse than about something in the neighborhood of about 1 mile from where I'd previously been living with my parents. that presented an opportunity with the $6 I had left in my pocket to make a new decision. And I did. And I went to my folks' place and knocked on the door. They let me in. And I started walking back toward my bedroom, what used to be the bedroom. And he says, my dad says, you really didn't think it was going to be that easy, did you? And I said, no, no. So we had a nice, direct parent to children kind of conversation. And it had me back in school and the next day, and it looked like all was forgiven eventually. But it was well taken because I realized that I needed to have a new story to tell because this one was going south quick. And I fell back on some of my previous endeavors of trying to earn a living. I was mowing grass, shoveling snow, doing all the normal kind of stuff that high school kids do, but with a little more success than running away. When I stopped and thought about it, I was amazed at how much my father had learned in the 2 or 3 days I had gone. And when I showed up, I had a little more respect for what he had done and how much I could count on him. A company called CQ, Congressional Quarterly, an interesting place that reported the voting of the government and their both the folks that work for both houses of the government. And I ended up running a press, printing press that kept track of all the various aspects of government voting, what was going on with that. And when it really hit me about the seriousness of what government meant to us, is seeing those votes transition into print and delivered to the newspapers, and the newspapers printing it. And I was delivering the newspapers. So I became part of the link in that information. The interesting thing was when we would trade photographs between the Washington Post and Congressional Quarterly, because we had some of the pictures that they needed, and we needed some of theirs. So all of a sudden, we became part of the link that delivered the papers, delivered the photos, delivered the news. And we understood that we were part of that. And so we had a chance to be part of that. And that's what really made me feel like I had become a man. automobiles. I used to like putting in, working on them. And I got a job working for a company that rebuilt cars, made it possible for these things to live again. And I enjoyed that part. And as a manager of this Western auto supply company, I was able to run the garage, get some people in the action, building, the construction, making that pay. And that was a lot of fun. Later, I ended up working for a company that repaired transmissions, still alive today, AMCO, AAMCO, beep beep. So it's a wild. The most important thing, finally got to doing something that I really enjoyed, and that was working on radio. Radio was telling people story. Working for WAVA radio was really fun. 20 years later, I retired. But I retired for a reason. I wanted an opportunity to help people tell their stories. And that's when you really find out the most about how important people's lives are. Because some of the moms and dads who had worked for different stories, radio, that was all well and good, but working and telling people's lives was the most fun about it. And when I think about my position within the company, I was helping small and active businesses up to big time businesses. And I worked helping them tell their stories. And they were good at it. Some were better than others, but it was just uniquely, singularly important in telling them through radio in ways that they could keep their lives alive, keep their activities, what they did for a living. The stories that they were telling were more than just repairing cars or transmissions or printing the word for a company that's going to carry the messages out. And they were all good, but they weren't as poor. They just weren't as expensive and as important as the families that we're working on now. It was actually a business guy who delivered a message on the radio that had an interesting a voice remembered from a gentleman named Zig Ziglar. And Zig said, "You can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want." And many of the people who followed his footsteps found that he had a message to deliver. And that delivery system worked with him talking about events that you could go and watch these events and hear people like Billy Graham, who was a great person to follow at that time. I'm full of regrets when I come to think about my father. I wish I had spent more time with him because he was funny and liked to cook. He taught me how to play golf. The bottom line is, I can't go back and do anything at this point except to try to borrow some time from my grandkids and have a chance to try to go back and share ideas and what was going on with his life. My father was a great man. I'm just disappointed that I didn't talk to him more and share with him about his life and what he was doing as he grew up. Jacques de Molay was one of the heroes of an ancient group called Masons, Master Masons. And the Masons relived and named this group for young men to participate in, and it was the Order of de Molay. And that group honored and respected this founder of the organization and would explain how it came to be and what they were hoping to extend. And they used the rituals and information they exchanged on the history of the Order of de Molay. And because of that, they were endorsed by today's Masonry. And that triangle that was two pointed arrows, that became recognized as Master Mason years and years and years ago. And that is a group that my father had gotten me involved with. And what's interesting is there was another group that was similar from a historical standpoint, and they were called the Red Men. They were the individuals who in Boston made up the Tea Party that put tea into the harbor in Boston, and people became very aware of what was going on. And that after years and years go by, to this date, that organization still exists. And they are very patriotic. and they still exist today. Now, most people know about the organization called Masonry. Masons were still active also, but a lot more well known, much more well known than the Indians. But if you go to a library or just get online with your software, you can find the information about that group and how they still exist. In the southwest corner of the state of Virginia, they had a small town called Saltville. And there was a good reason for that because they used salt to develop the foundation of explosives because you needed saltpeter or salt that you would normally eat, and you need some of that salt to preserve food, and secondly, to make hardware. The group of companies that were involved in that were getting information and pulling together the chemistry to make the gunpowder that was necessary for the Civil War. They protected that area for a while. And the challenge for our family was who else was there? And one of my relatives, John Blair, was part of the family that owned 12 acres of property down near Fort Chiswell. What's the one thing quick to show people when they come to visit is the land deed for the family that was well documented and filled out by the governor of the state of Virginia at that time, Mr. Patrick Henry. So all of a sudden, there was a direct connection with a lot of folks down that way. And the thing we were proud of was the fact that we had this direct connection to a historical figure who was well known and wanted quickly to make sure that we kept track of that. And that's what a lot of folks do. We were able to track our family name of Arnette from England. And that prosperity went through there and came across in 1770 and landed in the state of Virginia and Kentucky. And there are family members who are still tracing the war between the states, the war with England, And there's just something about war that calls for people to participate, to save their right of way, what they're living and writing for. My dad was in the United States Army over in England, working on one of the bases for the aircraft that were coming in to England because they didn't have radar. What they used was radio tracking devices where the signals would cross each other and they were able to figure out how far it's going to catch this aircraft that is coming in from Germany. And they were at that point within striking distance. So my dad had these pictures of the bombers with the pictures of Betty Boop and other women who were attractive enough to be painted onto the front end of those aircraft. And we tried to preserve some of those photos to show what was going on at that point. And then eventually, my dad retired from the military service and brought back to the States some of the pictures and photos that they participated in. We have tracked the warriors from both sides of our families, trying to keep them abreast of what's going on. They centered around a couple of different lineages, and I'm going to have to do some research on there, but the Blairs on my grandmother's side have the greatest collection. And Larry Arnette was my dad's brother. He was a physician. He was studying being a doctor when Pulaski, Virginia had a, a collapse. And it was during that period of time that the town business, which was a company that would go through and create the chemistry that was going to be used during other parts of the war. And unfortunately, part of the waste material that took place in that part of the United States, in the town of Saltville, had a dam that broke and ended up flooding the town and killing close to 2/3 of the people that lived there. My Uncle Larry left school and spent 6 months helping save lives, get people involved again. And in 6 months, he was back at school. Many considered quite heroic for the effort that he put out. And he was able to get people back in action and save their lives, their jobs, and their houses. Well, I stopped to think about my legacy. It's the use of radio by businesses who want to grow what they're doing and their faith. Because I worked for a group of radio stations that help carry the gospel. This was some of them right into the people's cars at a time when it wasn't always the best way to get the word out. People who are changing their approach to what they believe in. And that allowed them to make decisions about their lives and turning their lives around.